Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. And welcome to For the Record. Today is Friday, the 19th day of January 2018. Another nice, cool morning for you to stay comfortable. If you're a person who enjoys walking or getting out of your car, walking to work or something like that, excellent weather to do so. You stay nice and cool, out there as well. So we welcome this cool weather. Little bit, some people are saying a little bit unusual for January, but if you go back to the old days, before we got into all of this climate change and stuff like that, it used to be like this, around Cayman, and we welcomed it. It wasn't just the Christmas breeze, but it went into the new year as well. Well, I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension, For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor. Joining me in the studio, Mr. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. You're welcome to join us in the conversation every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. During that period, our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. When it's not that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson, it's the radio voice of Mr. Paul Akai. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, email us at fortherecord, one word, fortherecord at candw.ky. Additionally, we have a WhatsApp number where you can send a text or leave a voicemail. Don't expect to get an answer on that phone. Just leave a text or a voicemail. That number is 925-3261. I will repeat it, 925-3261. Send us a text or leave a voice note. The voice note will be played over during the course of the show as well. So, without any further ado, I want to say good morning to my two co-hosts, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. Ms. Steve, morning. How are you?
Hi.
Enjoying the weather?
Yeah, love it. So, good morning to both you and to Dr. Macfield, and obviously to our listening public who are gracious with us and allowing us to be in their space very early in the morning and join us in conversation, whether they're here on island or in the diaspora. So this morning, I'm going to use my time, claiming my time, Maxine Waters, to one more time to advertise the school reunion that we're having this Saturday at the Georgetown Yacht Club. Please contact Pat Macfield if you haven't done so already. We appreciate that, most folks were getting paid this week, but it's so important for us to get the funds in, especially the $60 per ticket, to make the final payments that we have to honor our obligations. This Saturday, 6:30, please call Pat, 916-3297. Again, 916-3297. I also wanted to give a really warm shout out to someone like Mrs. Goddard. And this is not to suggest that there weren't other teachers that were equally nice to us, equally warm to us, but She was an example of a teacher who knew us, understood us, ensured that there was democracy, students had their say. It wasn't always the case that, one would believe what teachers felt about students, but she would always ensure that, students had an opportunity to share their views on a number of issues. So I wanted to say a special shout out to Mrs. Goddard this morning. And this is not to suggest that your husband wasn't a wonderful teacher as well. So I hope he sits still and know that this isn't about gender or anything like that. But you were certainly one of those teachers that made learning a lifelong activity and invited us as students to always want to come to school. Thanks for that.
Doc, morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Mr. For the Record, and good morning to Mr. Pitcairn, and good morning to all your for the record listeners locally and those that are listening to you abroad, far away, Argentina, Brazil, all over Europe, New York, and North Carolina, South Carolina, Miami, everywhere they're listening to us. It's a good day, another day, and I'm looking forward to the weekend coming, the holiday early. And just after New Year's Day was another holiday, which is on Monday, and we look to see what it's going to bring.
Okay. I know, Doc, I should say to my audience, to our audience, that we were supposed to have a member of the official opposition on this morning. The person who was scheduled to be on was having car problems, and then of course they have he has children that have to be going to school as well, and as a result of that, he was unable to be with us. He was going to try to work with one of his colleagues to see whether or not someone else could fill in for him. We're not sure whether or not that will happen. So in the meantime, we have lots that we can talk about, and I'm sure that our audience, they have a lot that they want to talk about as well. But Dr. McField, you mentioned something, and I think we're going to go right into the heart of that discussion. We're going to talk about orders in council. We're going to talk about orders in council in general first, and then we're going to talk about a specific case in relation to this finance bill that was shepherded through the UK Parliament, and it took several months for that to go through as well. And we knew that there were particular aspects of that bill that were directed at the overseas territories, and we heard even utterances that they were going to keep the overseas territories in check in certain areas. But I'm going to start off by just reading something, and you can assist me with this as well, what orders in councils are. And it says, decisions of the Privy Council are recorded in orders which have the force of law. Such orders come in many forms, but the basic distinction between orders in council and orders, there's a difference between orders in council and orders of council. Mm-hmm. So orders in council are orders that have been approved at a meeting of the Privy Council personally by the Queen. They fall into two broad categories, one statutory and the other one prerogative, we're told. And it says statutory orders are made under any of the numerous powers contained in the Acts of Parliament which give Her Majesty a power to make orders. Prerogative orders are made under the inherent power of the Crown to act on matters for which Parliament has not legislated. Most statutory orders in council are statutory instruments under Section 1 of the Statutory Instruments Act 1946. every power to make an order in council conferred by an act of parliament and after the 1st of January 1946 must be a statutory instrument. And it says statutory instruments are numbered in a standard series and published in the statutory by the statutory office. They are and they're available, online. Goes on to say some statutory orders are made under acts that predate the 1946 Act, which are not statutory instruments. Examples are orders made under the Naval and Maritime Pay and Pensions Act and the Burial Act 1853, which provides for the closure of churchyards which no longer have room for burials and things of that nature. And then it goes on to say orders in council always say when and where they were made, as Privy Council meetings are usually held at Buckingham Palace. Orders generally begin at the court, and it's quote there. This is how the orders begin at the court at Buckingham Palace, but the orders must also be made at Windsor Castle, Balmoral, Sandringham, and on one occasion at Heathrow as well. Then we go on to talk about Parliament's involvement. It says statutory orders may also involve a parliamentary procedure. Different acts have different provisions, but orders may need to be laid before Parliament in draft before being made or after they have been made. The act may also require the orders to be approved by Parliament before it comes into force. Orders in council made at meetings of the Privy Council since 2000 are listed in their websites and stuff that go on with that. So two different concepts: order in council and order of council. Yes.
Yes. Well, you notice it says that order in council are orders that are not statutory instruments, and they are orders that are made personally by the Queen and her Privy Council, and usually those orders are made to give acquiescence to a decision made in cabinet by the majority government. When they say, for instance, the cabinet says that they want to get all of the information about companies and stuff in the Cayman Islands. That's a cabinet decision. They will then ask the Queen to make an order in council. We call it the nuclear option. It's in other words, you have to obey that or be in contempt of the British Parliament. And so that is one way, and we've seen that done several times. One was with the abolition of capital punishment, when they made order in council and they forced us to stop hanging in Cayman. The orders which need parliamentary acquiescence is for instance as you read, it has to be under a law. And it has to get parliamentary acquiescence as well. And an example of that would be our 2009 statutory instruments, over the Constitution of the Cayman Islands, and the law on which the Queen was able to exercise her powers in council to bring the Constitution into effect was the West Indies Act 1962, which gave the Queen powers to make Constitution for the Caribbean, for the overseas countries and territories, especially in the West Indies. That is an example of that, and that had to be laid before Parliament, and then Parliament has to say yes before it comes into force. Now, what has happened now with the Finance Act, that it took them some 2 or 3 years to get through the House of Commons. And when they sent it up to the House of Lords rejected a provision in it that would allow them by law to make an order in council to force the overseas territories to give up information about about people's private business, the disclosure. The House of Lords rejected that and said for many reasons said it would be unfair, and the overseas countries would have no input into it, and it would be unfair, and they need to be consulted. Now you as a reporter, you don't have to be a lawyer. You as a reporter, as you are, sitting on the outside, and taking into account the fact that they took 2 or 3 years to get this bill passed through the House of Commons, and then it sent it to the House of Lords, and then the House of Lords rejected that provision in it that would give them the power to make by law, the power by law, not an order in council, by law, to get disclosure. Why do you think they did that?
I wouldn't venture a guess.
Well, when you think that the Queen herself has interests in these companies in the overseas countries and territories.
Yes.
And then when
the Paradise Papers.
Exactly. And then when you see the fact that she would have to call the Privy Council together herself personally to be able to get an order in council against herself, you see they didn't want to go to the Queen to do that.
Okay, we're going to take a commercial break. Folks, please stay tuned. We're going to be talking more about this very interesting topic because it does affect the Cayman Islands as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. We're discussing decisions by the House of Lords, and we're going to continue with our conversation. Dr. Macfield, I think you want to refer to an article in one of our local newspapers talking about this particular issue as well.
Yes, the article in the Compass on January the 17th, and it heads, House of Lords rejects public beneficial ownership registers. But that headline is misleading because the House of Lords did not reject public beneficial ownership registers. What the House of Lords rejected was a clause in the bill, in the finance bill that came before them, that would allow the government to come to get the beneficial register ownership by order in council.
Yes.
They did not reject beneficial ownership registers. They say, go and do it some other way, but not order in council, because order in council, well, we call it the nuclear option, would be very onerous, and it would be very unfair to the overseas countries and territories who will not have any input into how the order was made against them, and that the House of Lords rejected that as not being fair to them. But it didn't reject beneficial ownership of registers, because the orders in council, as you say, are used an ordinary statute. It's an ordinary statutory instrument where an ordinary statutory instrument would be inappropriate, and the orders in councils are approved in person by the monarch, by the Queen. And you can understand the House of Commons, the conflict they would have if they were asking the Queen herself personally to make an order in council to disclose information that she has that is private in the overseas countries and territories. So they decided we will skip that and we will go straight to the House of Lords to approve the clause in the bill that we have. And they said, no, we're not doing that. And you can understand why. Because that would make it law. Law. They would not have to go to the Queen to get her to sign an order in council. They could enforce it by law. The Attorney General of the United Kingdom could enforce it by law. And the House of Lords said no. So
now, does this have any precedent-setting values to it?
Not really, because they can still insist that you sign up. And on another radio station, they were saying, well, what happened to the people who didn't sign? And what happened to the people who signed now? The Cayman has already signed up.
Yes.
And the people who didn't sign are in the same position. The government will insist that they sign. or they will, they will be subject to certain sanctions that the British Parliament itself can make.
And one of the, I'm quoting from the Caymanian Compass now, and they say that in the decision, it says here that the amendment is constitutionally wrong and unjust, and causing unwarranted aspersions with a number of our loyal overseas territories. Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Minister, emphasized the efforts made by the Cayman Islands and other territories in establishing centralized registries and providing beneficial ownership information to UK authorities, rather than impose new requirements on overseas territories without their consent, because that's
what it would be.
It would be without our consent.
Yes, that's right.
The UK should focus on the existing cooperation and the progress that has been made, he said. Incorporating with the UK government, the overseas territories had passed their own legislation and made technological investments. And as a result, they are already meeting international regulations. Changing the rules again would be unacceptable, he said. Now, I think there was one MP by the name of Stern who was really the strong proponent of bringing these sanctions and having this legislation. I guess sometimes the UK referred to it. I remember one former governor, referring to having the whip hand.
That's right.
And you know what the whip hand is?
Yes,
the whip hand is the hand that you hold the whip in.
That's right.
To whip the horse.
That's right.
To get him to go in the direction that you want to go, or to go as fast as or the slave.
Or to whip the slave. That's right.
So
the House of...
I was going to
Go
say,
on,
yeah,
Mr.
I was
Carey.
wondering. I haven't read the article, but I know that the other thought that came to mind as I was listening to both you and Dr. Macfield is that the UK standard is not even as good as the ones that we have implemented, and to go and implement what they are suggesting would actually invite judicial review. Or at least that's a personal view. Yeah.
Well, what they want to use their parliamentary power to force us to do so. In other words, it would be a law that we had to obey. Otherwise, we'd be in contempt of Parliament. And the House of Lords rejected that. And House of Lords say there's other ways you can do so. You can go to the Queen and ask her to do an order in council. You can go to her because that's a prerogative right that you have to ask her to put a decision of your cabinet into an order. But of course, you're not going to do that because the Queen has interest in the Caribbean, in the overseas countries and territories, and would probably not be acquiescent to them disclosing what her interest is. And so they're stuck now. But it's going to be interesting to see how they come back now at the overseas countries and territories, and what other method they're going to use now to try to force us to do this.
Well, what's interesting is, and it seems as if Lord Ahmad is really on our side in this regard, and he says here again, imposing public registers would only drive business to other less regulated jurisdictions where British law enforcement authorities would not have the same level of access. So he said that. What is important here is that the regime that we have in place here in the Cayman Islands, as far as our public register is concerned, is one that has been accepted by the financial community
all over the world.
Which is going to be
Britain.
More affected than any other entity, as far as this is concerned, and has been accepted, by them. And our government here has also said that we will adhere to the standards that other jurisdictions are adhering to. We're not going to be the guinea pig and go out there any further than we have to at this time, which is correct. Folks, we have to go to our 8 o'clock news now. When we return, the conversation will continue. We certainly will welcome your calls and input you don't necessarily have to discuss the topic that we're discussing. We're going to be talking about basically everything today. We want to talk about crime. We haven't had an opportunity, and I promised to do that. I think it was Wednesday? One day we promised that we were going to talk about crime, and we never got to it. And we see what's happening in our neighboring country as well, what's happening there. We can talk about that also. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. We're talking about the House of Lords' rejection of an amendment to the proposed sanctions and anti-money laundering bill. I am going to read an article now from a website called International Investments, and it's headed House of Lords rejects public beneficial ownership register for 6 overseas territories. Says the UK House of Lords yesterday voted down a proposal that would have called for 6 overseas territories to implement a public accessible register of beneficial ownerships by the 1st of January 2020. The vote took place during a debate on a proposed sanctions and anti-money laundering bill, of which the plan to introduce a public beneficial ownership requirement had been put forward as a possible amendment. According to the Hansard's records of the debate, the measure had been tabled by Baroness Stern, who I mentioned earlier, but was rejected by 211 to 201 votes. So a very slim margin. After a debate which included comments by Lord Flight, a commissioner of the Guernsey Financial Services Commission, a fact he mentioned in his remarks. The 6 jurisdictions that were the focus of the amendments were Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Montserrat, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. As reported, as of the 1st of July 2017, all Crown dependencies and overseas territories were required to have an equivalent and reciprocal mechanism in place with the UK to enhance the exchange of beneficial ownership information with law enforcement authorities, something they signed up to in 2016 following the introduction of the UK's so-called Register of People with Significant Control. However, unlike the proposal rejected by the House of Lords on Wednesday, the information in question can only be shared with law enforcement entities and is not required to be available to the public. In introductory remarks, Baroness Stern said that one of the 6 jurisdictions in question, that is Montserrat, had already said it would agree to a public beneficial ownership register. And I want you to place an asterisk by Montserrat. And we're not going to disparage them in any way, but we're going to see why Montserrat would go along with it. We know exactly why Montserrat would go along with it. In his comments, Lord Flight said the proposed amendment would be counterproductive in its effect and added, it is interesting to note that law enforcement agencies do not support public registers, particularly in such territories as they do not improve law enforcement capabilities. Moreover, the UK's overseas dependencies have already shown themselves extremely efficient in responding to the requests of policing and other agencies, Lord Flight, who is also chairman of the Aurora Investment Trust PLC, added. So you had people that had certain vested interests in there as well. Okay. Interestingly, tax authorities do not support public registers. That's interesting. Tax authorities do not support public registers either, as people report less candidly than when information is available only to public authorities. Echoing comments of others, Lord Flight also noted that public registers of beneficial ownership are seen to facilitate identity theft. And he's quoted as saying, "I think everyone is in favor of the objective. The question is how you achieve it most effectively. I have been a commissioner in Guernsey, in the Guernsey Financial Services Commission for a number of years and have had some involvement in what Guernsey has done. Interestingly, Guernsey scores higher than the UK for general regulatory effectiveness and compliance. And I would venture to say that so do many, if not all, of the overseas territories as well. In particular, the Cayman Islands and Bermuda echoes the same sentiment also. Those are my remarks.
Well, Lord Nesbitt family working in the Cayman Islands.
Yes.
I now picked up the article.
Okay, but you want to start? You read some for me now. I'm getting tired.
No, but what
starting? Okay, however, starting at the paragraph just about the register could inflict competitive disadvantage.
I'm just coming down here now, though, because I was just flicking through it only because I now found the point that I have found a paragraph actually that deals with the point that I raised about judicial review, and they were saying that to use an order in council for financial regulation of these jurisdictions, which were the ones that you just named,
right,
when the overseas territories have already adopted international standards, while the UK has not, would expose the UK to legal challenge as potentially irrational and therefore could be overturned on judicial review. And that's what I thought when I was listening to both you and yeah. So they also said that the overseas territories in the Caribbean, their rival centers are the US, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And this is the guy Nasby.
You forgot to say London too.
He didn't. Well, come on. We were just talking about the Republicans and how they gang around each other and, hide the lies.
Okay.
Go on. Yeah.
So it says, however, the crucial thing is that the registers are accurate, have been verified, and can be used swiftly by the proper authorities that need that information. I am afraid that making them public undoes a lot of the point of them. And then talking about registers could inflict competitive disadvantage. Lord Nasby, a conservative British peer who prefaced his remarks by declaring his interest as the vice chairman of the all-party parliamentary group of the Cayman Islands, and the fact that I have family working in the Cayman Islands, pointed out that the fact that most countries currently are not adopting public registers could mean that the proposed amendments requiring them of the UK's offshore centers would put them at a competitive disadvantage. I like how he phrased that, the UK's offshore financial centers. Certainly, for the overseas territories in the Caribbean, the rival centers are the United States, Hong Kong, and Singapore, like Miss Teresa said. They have all looked at public registers, but not one has agreed to it. So, if we force the overseas territories to have public registers, the effect will be the business will move away. He also questioned the constitutionality of the UK passing legislation of this kind for the self-governing overseas territories. I'm going to stop there simply because that is a good point for us to stop about the constitutionality of the UK imposing things on us, because we have, I would say we have never. There was one occasion when the Honorable W. McKeever Bush was Premier that we challenged them and were successful. I don't remember the details of it, but it had to do with the savings tax initiative in the early 2000s when that came about. But there has always been a reluctance for us to challenge the UK on constitutional grounds when they try to inflict harm and try to impose, things on us. The other one would be, the clear one would be the order in council when it came to the death penalty.
That's right. We accepted that. We capitulated and accepted that because it came from the UK. We never even tried to challenge that.
Yes.
Even though now we see what's happening. There are a lot of studies that says that the death penalty is not a deterrent to murder or high crime, but that's not the point. The point is that we didn't even challenge it when they changed our laws unilaterally over there in Westminster without our input and without letting us know.
Okay. We want to switch gears, Ms. T. I know you want to talk about something. Let's go there.
No. I've just been keeping an eye on immigration and DACA in the United States, but also with what has transpired yesterday in Jamaica in St. James with the crime.
Yes.
And that has been one of the central concerns that I have with respect to the way our economy is organized. And in fact, yesterday, the taxman we infamously referred him as, he was having a conversation with Ruth Ann on her show last evening or one day this week. And I remembered him speaking of the importance of having a dialogue about the inequality in the community and the need to have more conversation about the social status of the Caymanian people. Now, and I got to be careful because I was getting out of the car when I was listening to him. But I think what he was trying to say, and I don't like speaking for people necessarily, but he wanted the media to focus some more on discussing things that are so relevant to the Caymanian community that are disenfranchised. And he felt that sufficient discussion is usually made about the offshore community, but the Caymanian community seems to be left behind. And I have said that our governments historically have focused on economic viability, and they've done a fairly good job with that, but at the expense, I believe, of not paying sufficient attention to the ramifications of what happens when you don't have a community and a plan, a grand plan that actually develops your community to meet the economic needs. And I say, we focus, for example, on what is more important. We were talking about the dock the other day versus the airlift. And, you compare the two, which is more useful, and then design a program in terms of how we spend the money that we have. I think the taxman was correct, especially as I started to review some of the material on what has been going on in Jamaica. And, many people have been saying, why did it take the Jamaican government so long before they addressed the concern? Because something like over 335 people died last year from the relationships based on gun violence and other issues and the factions within the community. Why did the government take so long to address the concerns? And, because people, when you look at the interviews that were taken on the TV, people are aware of the gang activity and who is involved and where the guns are kept. Much like the way Caymanians, or not necessarily Caymanians, people on the ground are aware of what is going on with the criminality in our community. So I am hoping that we don't wait until things get so exacerbated that we are unable to control it. I hear people say that, there are certain things that come with growth, but I think that it can be managed, but we have to pay attention to what is going on and make it a priority so that it doesn't get out, so that it's disproportionate in a way that, we can't really manage it.
Okay, we have to take a commercial break now. When we return, the conversation will continue. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I want to remind you that our phone lines are open. We know that you're listening, but if you have more of an interest in what we're talking about and you want to hear us, then we're going to continue to talk. But our toll-free number provided for courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. You can also email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky, as well as send us a text or a voice note on 925-3261. Now, they have declared a state of emergency in the parish of St. James in Jamaica. You heard Miss Teresa speak earlier about the issues there. And in the today's Jamaica Gleaner, they're wanting to inform people, let them know what a state of emergency is and what to do when a state of emergency is in effect. And I'm going to ask Dr. Steve Macfield to read something about that for us.
Well, state of emergencies, it varies from different country to country.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, they call it under the Canada War Act. And that's why they gives them the power to do state of emergencies. So it says here in the Jamaica Gleaner, Prime Minister Andrew Holness this afternoon declared a state of public emergency for the parish of St. James. It's in response to a rampant criminality, including murders and shooting in the parish. Last year, St. James recorded 335 murders, the highest level total, and since the start of the year, murders and shootings have continued. Here are what facts you should know. What is a state of emergency? Section 26 of the Constitution explains a period of public emergency as any period during which A. Jamaica is engaged in war, B. There is in force a proclamation by the Governor General declaring that a state of emergency
Exists.
a state of public emergency exists, and C. There is in force a resolution of each house supported by the votes of a majority of all members of that house declaring the democratic institutions in Jamaica are threatened by subversion. When can it be declared? 1. When a state of war between Jamaica and a foreign state is imminent. 2. As a result of the occurrence of any earthquake, hurricane, flood, fire, outbreak of pestilence, outbreak of infectious disease, or other calamity. And 3. When action has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person on such an extensive scale it could likely endanger the public safety or deprive the community of any substantial portion of the community of supplies or services essential to life. And what does it mean? 1. Extraordinary powers have been given to the security forces. Some rights have been suspended. Members of the security forces may search places without a warrant. And the duration of it, the proclamation shall remain in force for a period of 1 month unless extended by the House of Representatives or revoked.
Okay. Tell us about the history of the state of emergency in Jamaica. I think it tells us something about that as well.
Can you get that back?
Okay. I will read that for you then.
Okay.
It says the history of the state of emergency in Jamaica. In October 1966, a state of emergency was declared in West Kingston as a result of violence. Then in June of 1976, state of public emergency again based on violence. September 2004, state of emergency after Hurricane Ivan. May of 2010, in advance of the attempt to arrest Christopher Dudas Coke on an extradition warrant. And I would imagine that last one, the May 2010, was probably the most controversial of all of them because there are suspicions, I say suspicions, and there's probably evidence of it as well, that the U.S. authorities were also involved in that and assisted the Jamaican government, whether it was by using
Surveillance.
those AVAC
Yes.
planes and stuff like that for it. Now, let's talk about the Cayman Islands. And it mentions here also that in 2004, a state of emergency was declared after Hurricane Ivan.
Yes.
We faced a similar situation here in the Cayman Islands where there was some looting, but not so much a state of emergency in terms of the looting, but because of the condition of the island after Hurricane Ivan. We were faced with a constitutional crisis. And why were we faced with a constitutional crisis? Because we really didn't have any legislation dealing with state of emergency. And it was a situation where our governor was the man in control once they were able to determine that they could declare some state of emergency. The governor was in control. It left elected members of the Legislative Assembly, including the cabinet to a certain extent, powerless.
But they were powerless.
Powerless.
They were powerless.
Had no effect
Yes.
whatsoever, and it it also came at a time when our legislature had been dissolved, because of the
Upcoming
upcoming elections
election.
as well. So, I think we have gotten that situation sorted out now, and we have a proper state of emergency legislation in place. But I'm going to throw the mic back over to you, Doc.
Well, the first time I saw a state of emergency was when I was in Canada, when Trudeau, I think it was 70, when he used what they call the Canadian War Act to impose a state of emergency in Quebec. And when we had the FLQ crisis, when one of the British MPs one of the members of Parliament and one of the British representatives in Canada were kidnapped. And it is a frightening thing because it takes away your civil liberties. It suspended all rights that you have, and you can be shot on sight. And it transfer all the powers into the security forces, and it means if you don't obey what they tell you, for instance, it will impose certain hours where you can be on the streets and certain hours you cannot be on the streets, and certain areas where you can be in certain areas where you can't be, and it suspends the constitutional powers, the freedom that you have for the duration of the state of emergencies, and it's not good. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point in Cayman where we will have to declare a state of emergency again, unless it's a devastating hurricane. But it would be interesting to see what would happen in Cayman Islands here, because the governor still have power in Cayman now to impose a state of emergency. But they would
under his reserve powers.
On the reserve powers to do that, and I just wondered, how are we going to solve all of the gun crimes and the shootings in Cayman Islands? Do we have to go to a state of emergency? I would like to know that from our listeners, if they're listening to us this morning, whether they think that we should have to go to a state of emergency to be able to control the crime that because if a man can't sit in his car or walk the streets or go into a nightclub or go to a place without being threatened to get killed, I mean, we're in a bad position.
Or not necessarily going to full scale into a state of emergency, but giving law enforcement authorities additional powers, and maybe to a certain extent suspending some of the constitutional rights for a period of time as it relates to to criminals as well. I mean, that is going way over to the right, but if you need to do it, you need to do it. Let's take a caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, O.C. Good morning to the panel.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good, man. It's a good subject this morning because I don't know what the legislators in this country think when these things happen. Nobody speaks up about the same like me. But you remember when Baines was here, the then governor, the one that left there, he they had given him some authority that he could tap into people's phones without people knowing. You remember that?
Yes, I remember. It's still, I think, it's still in effect.
That's what I'm saying. It's still in effect. And here's another thing. You remember when we had the National Hurricane Recovery Fund?
Yes.
That thing, that when people use names like national, make you think it was a government operation, that was a private thing. The governor, the then governor, given, hello?
Yes,
Yeah,
we're
we're
here.
listening.
We're listening.
The then governor was then made chairman of that fund. And Dr. Laskin, if you remember that guy, he was the American guy, I think.
Mark Laskin, yes.
Right? That was running the show. And I know for a fact, or not for a fact, but I know that people that worked with him told me he just sat down in that place up there by the whatever that building is he was in. And they collected $26 million. And after I was on the committee that was going around and checking the damage to buildings, stuff like that, giving estimates of repairs and all that kind of thing. And I went all the way to East End, places like that, looking at different things. And up to today, there's some little buildings that have never been repaired. Now, what I'm going to say is this. There were people involved, lawyers who involved, and working with the law firms. And when this thing was over, some of them opened their own office. Laskin left here, not even a word. In fact, the government was on Rooster, the Rooster show. And I called in and asked him, how is it possible that Mr. Laskin, who was this big guy that was in charge of all this, he left this island, not even a cocktail party for him. Nobody could answer it. There were people that got rich off of that thing. You hear what I tell you? And
When you say people got rich in what we call it, because bear in mind, there's a couple of facts that you want to bear in mind. Number one, the government put $5 million into that fund as well. Number two, we were seeking local as well as international aid. We were seeking donations from not only locally, but internationally. We knew that individuals as well as corporate entities are very reluctant to put money into the hands of governments, not only the Cayman Islands government, but any government. So we had to find a vehicle that was acceptable to donors that could look at it and say, this is an acceptable vehicle that we will donate money to. Government did have a representative onto that board as well, despite the fact that, yes, the governor did chair it, I believe, but government had a representative on there as well. So just bear that in mind.
yeah, but okay, what the point I'm making is this.
Mm-hmm.
$26 million was collected, and even after that, that was still being funded up until when they had the thing in Cayman back, because Laskin got on the radio and started talking what he needed to collect more money now for this thing. What I'm saying is that the amount of money they collected could have fixed every house, because the only houses on there, I think, was under $200,000 that they were doing repairs on. And all of these small homes and stuff I see up in East End is still gone, destroyed, that nobody is accountable.
Mm-hmm.
That is the problem with Cayman, period.
Carl, I'm going to ask you to leave us there. We're past our commercial break time now, but certainly feel free to call back if you want, because I'm going to make some more comments as well. I'm going to talk about East End for a minute and how East End was blessed in a way, but cursed in another way as well when it came to receiving funds. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have one caller. Before I go to that caller, I referred to East End earlier, and the East End was blessed because the IAMCO company assisted East End. There were monies that were specifically earmarked for East End, And I must point out that the owner of that company, the Oldie, Mrs. Oldie, did give to other districts as well, did give to the government as well. But there was this assumption that East End was taken care of, when in fact East End still, the people of East End still needed assistance in addition to what IAMCO was doing. And as a result of that, they lost out on that. Dr. Macfield, you want to talk something about our Constitution and responsibility? Just to point out that while we're not in a state of emergency in the Cayman Islands, the situation appears to be getting worse and worse each day. We're seeing the purse snatchings going on in the beach area. We're seeing the lawlessness in the parking lots of nightclubs and restaurants. We don't want to wait until it becomes an epidemic before we start to do something about it.
Yes.
The guns,
Yes.
the proliferation of guns in the Cayman Islands. We know where they're coming from. At one point in time, they were coming on the cruise ships.
Yes.
The crew members on board cruise ships, bringing them ashore, making money out of them. That was stymied. That was stopped. We know now that they come on the canoes with the drugs when they come from Jamaica. Where does Jamaica get them from? Jamaica gets them from Haiti, because there's a traffic between Haiti and Jamaica as well. I'm told that one caller is on now. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello?
Yes, good morning.
Yes, my name is Billy.
Hey, Billy, morning.
Yeah, good morning, OC, Dr. Maxfield, and of course, Miss Teresa.
Good morning.
Good morning. I just thought I might chime in on two quick comments. Maybe the second one might be a little longer. The first one is about the death penalty. Dr. Maxfield rightly mentioned that this has been found in many studies to be not a deterrent to crime. You might be interested that in Idi Amin's Uganda, and I think you know this, he introduced public hangings in the early 70s as hopefully some kind of deterrent. And somebody did a research there, interviewing these people who were on death row awaiting this public hanging. And he found out that virtually all of them had witnessed these public hangings. It never had an effect on them.
Wow.
And as you know, usually a criminal does not think of the penalty.
No, he
commit a
doesn't.
crime.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You say, well, if I'm not caught, it's not totally irrelevant. So. But more importantly, the issue of emergency powers. I had the privilege many, many moons ago to write a thesis on emergency powers from a remote republic called Zambia, from which I come. But that thesis was based on colonial legislation which was passed by the British government to control the whole independence struggle. They had a very interesting structure to the emergency powers. They had two kinds of emergencies. They had one which was called a full emergency, and which is that a state of emergency actually exists. Once the governor declared that, then an act called the Emergency Powers Act was triggered. But they also had a second kind of emergency, what was called a threatened emergency. That is a situation which, if it is allowed to continue, might lead to a state of emergency. And I'm just thinking here about OC, what you just said just now about, should we do something now before this thing gets out of hand? And that might be relevant to this.
But
now,
Mr. Billy, I just want to get your take on this.
Yes,
I have been advocating this for ever since the Constitution came in, particularly Section 65 of the Constitution. It's titled Special Responsibilities of the Governor.
Yes.
And it says the governor shall be responsible for the conduct subject to this Constitution and any other law of any business of the government with respect to the following matters, and then defense, external affairs, internal security, including the police. That's the one I want to talk about. And then and then more appointment of civil servants. I'm not interested in that one. Then it says, then subsection 2 says, the governor acting after consultation with the premier may assign or delegate to any member of the cabinet by instrument in writing and on such terms and conditions as he or she may impose responsibility for the conduct on behalf of the governor of any business in the legislative assembly with respect to any of the matters listed in subsection 1.
Yes.
Now, since Caymanians do not want independence, that's a bad word and things like that, Why is it that, in your opinion, that the members of the cabinet, that the premier doesn't go to the governor and say, since we have such crime and we have brought police from different places and we have brought commissioners from different places and it's still escalating, why doesn't the premier go, as the Constitution said he can, and ask the governor to assign, delegate responsibility to the police to a member of the cabinet so that we can do this ourselves? What do you think is the reason why that's not done?
It's a difficult question, but it's interesting that you should point that out. Well, in a sense, it is an easy question. I think that should be done. And it seems to me it might be a better way of dealing with the escalating crime than, for example, declaring a state of emergency.
Right.
Yes.
Because, you see, under a state of emergency, in this particular the jurisdiction I wrote a thesis on, there was an attempt to use emergency legislation to control crime. And the court struggled with that because they said even if crime is prevalent, that does not justify the creation of or the declaration of a state of emergency. And some courts were very strong. They said even a big prevalence in crime is not a threat to public security, which was very widely defined. So it seems to me what you are saying in terms of that other alternative, it might be one which is fraught with less legal problems and might be much more effective, because then you don't have to face this conceptual problem as to what is common crime, however prevalent, which is not a threat to public security, and certain kinds of crimes which are a threat to public security. So Cayman has got actually a better alternative to be able to deal with that, I think.
Yes, because if I was a member of cabinet, and I was elected by the people, and the Constitution gives me responsibility for certain things without having to get independence, I would be pushing the envelope to get responsibility to do that for the benefit of my country.
Exactly, because then you get the maximum possible internal self-government that you can ever get close to independence.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks very much for that question, and thanks for allowing me to
before you go, Billy, you go, so you're advocating not for a state of emergency, but would you give the law enforcement authorities, in particular the police, additional powers, or what would be your suggestion?
My suggestion would be to go to an emergency. First of all, I think in terms of the society, it sends a very difficult message, a very mixed message, a negative message. But also there are legal problems, constitutional legal problems, as to whether common crime can be considered to be a threat to public security and so on. So I would advocate rather finding a midway closer to what Dr. Maxfield referred to, but allowing a certain degree of changes to the powers of the police. They have to be very, very carefully circumscribed to ensure that they don't justify. They not violate the human rights provisions. Yes, but you see, because the human rights provisions themselves have got they are imbued in them, most of them, a sense of proportionality. Like, what are you dealing with? Because your action will be a little more drastic if you are dealing with something that is really serious. So I think there's quite some scope there to be able to expand the powers of the police of enforcement without declaring an emergency, and while staying on this side of the human rights provision.
How would we look at the bail laws, for instance? Because we find that there are occasions when people are out on bail and then they recommit, and when they're back out on bail again.
Yes, the bail provisions are very tricky. Way back, I was drafting some legislation regarding bail, because bail, as you know, is protected under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And in some jurisdictions, they try to say if you are accused of or you are suspected of being involved in drug trafficking, no bail should be given.
Mm-hmm.
And they run into a legal problem. They said you cannot absolutely restrict bail.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to restrict it only to the extent necessary for law enforcement. And in any case, you don't keep somebody in custody while you are doing the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you pick them up, most of the investigation should be done. There should be maybe a little bit left over for you to tie up the case, but don't pick up somebody, keep them in jail for a long time without bail, because that's a problem. But
Exactly.
while you're on this subject, under the British legislation, what they used to do is you could be detained for up to 14 days without being told what your grounds are. But they had to give you grounds within 14 days. But later on, the independence court declared that if you serve the grounds on the 15th day, then the detention is unlawful ab initio and so on. It can be very complicated, but it can be done.
Okay, well, Billy, I want you to continue to listen in, because when we return from our break, we're going to talk about extradition. One of my friends is very concerned about the fact that you have someone who's accused of a crime here, does not reside in the Cayman Islands, is not a citizen, overseas territorial citizen of the Cayman Islands, but is able to fight extradition and possibly be granted legal aid as well. So listening to that, and if you feel that there are any comments on it, please call back in and join us in the conversation.
I will listen in. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Billy. Folks, please stay tuned. We're going to our 9 o'clock headline news, and then For the Record, we'll return. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. Dr. Macfield has stepped out for a minute, but one good thing about having two lawyers in a room, when one leaves, there's still one with me.
But that area of law that you're talking about is outside my expertise, so
yes,
I'm going
yes.
to listen.
Yeah. Well, we know the situation of a person who is accused of committing a double homicide in the United States, was here in the Cayman Islands, and it appears as if the authorities here in the Cayman Islands, acting on a request by U.S. authorities in Florida, arrested this person on an extradition warrant, and he was taken before the courts and indicated to the courts through his attorney that he would be fighting extradition back to the United States. Now, what we believe we know so far is that he doesn't belong to the Cayman Islands. He's not a British overseas territorial citizen by virtue of a connection with the Cayman Islands. He does not reside permanently in the Cayman Islands. He does not possess Caymanian status, as well. And he is just here. He was just here as a tourist, as a visitor, with time being granted by the immigration department, and possibly getting an extension.
What they should have done, they should have made this report to the immigration officer, give them the information, and let the immigration officer refuse to allow him to stay any longer, and he would have to leave.
But do we know at that point in time, when he sought an extension, did we know that he was wanted by U.S. authorities?
No. When the Americans know that he was wanted, what the course of action they should have taken is go to the immigration and say, listen, here's this man, this is what he's done here. And the immigration would say, we don't want him here. And when they come in for an extension,
he would say he'd had to leave.
He would have to leave.
Yes. And if he stayed beyond that
and
period
if he stayed
of
beyond
time,
that leave,
then you could arrest him for
overstaying. Overstaying.
Now, the other question is, in that regard then, let's put another scenario forward. It appears as if this person is a Jamaican national.
Yes.
I don't know whether or not he also possesses U.S. citizenship or just a green card as a permanent resident. Yes. Because if he is a Jamaican citizen,
they would have to send him back to Jamaica.
Yes.
Not to the United States.
Exactly.
Not to the United States.
So that would have presented, a problem for him as well. But we know now the scenario that we have is that he has been arrested. He has been taken before the courts. he has indicated that he will fight extradition.
Yes,
Now, I
which-
know you've been involved in extradition
That's
cases,
right.
cases before.
Yes.
So at some point in time now, I would imagine that on the initial extradition request,
Yes.
or the warrant,
warrant,
to
yes.
hold him, would give some details about the crime.
It has to give details about the crime.
Right, and then
And-
at the actual extradition now, you will get additional details to establish the fact that a crime has been committed in the jurisdiction
Because
from
once-
which he's being to which he is being
Yeah,
extradited.
and it has to be a crime that if the act has to be an act. If it,
the mic. Yeah.
you on?
No, yeah.
The act has to be an act that if it happened in the Cayman Islands, it would also be a crime in the Cayman Islands too. You understand?
Yes. I think we
Yes.
have one caller. Let's
Okay.
go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. O.C. Good
Yes.
morning to Dr. Keith. Good morning, Mr. Teresa.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. You must be here again on it. It's very interesting what you all are talking about here. This individual here. I know that a green card is a powerful instrument in the United States because in time of war, if it's necessary, they can draft you if there's a draft with a green card. And the only thing you really can't do is vote. And in certain counties, you can even vote in like if it's the school board council, like I think you can. You have to pay all the taxes everybody has to pay. And if you're stopped by the firemen fighting a fire, they can command you to help and so forth, just like any citizen. In that sort of state of emergency there. With regards to this gentleman, I don't know if when they advise the immigration or whatever, or advise the government here or the director of public prosecutions, most you lawyers here know a lot more about that, how it takes place and what transpires in that case than I do. So what you're saying, Dr. Steve, is makes sense. If they had advised the immigration department, but we don't know when they knew or what happened. And sometimes in this circumstances in this town colony, sometimes these things are never made public or known to the public. We have to just go along and accept it. I remember that case in Jamaica when they had that state of emergency. It was in one part of Kingston, really. It wasn't for all Kingston. It was just one part, Trenchtown, I think it was. And I do remember going
Was that
in there.
West Kingston?
West Kingston. I do remember going in there. I'd gone to watch a cricket match and be involved in it with a company I worked for, a huge company. I won't call the name. And anyhow, a giant company, not just and they control most things in Jamaica at the time. Anyhow, we were coming back and we had to drop off some of the guys, that our fellow co-workers who lived there. And then we noticed the streets were totally desolate at 10 o'clock in the night. That's unheard of in Kingston, completely desolate. And that's when we realized there was a band of soldiers and a sergeant in charge, and they stopped us. And then, luckily for us, was that one of our co-workers was a schoolmate of the sergeant who was in charge of that platoon. And they had commandeered a bar there, and that's where they set up everything, the gun belts and bullets and machines on the counter and so forth, and I won't wait the thing, but he knew him and he recognized him right away and said, come on, Berry, come on, sit here, stand with us, and we're in here and had a couple of drinks with them and then left and went home, but we were fortunate that he knew them, or we might have a hard time explaining why we were there. Anyhow, I just wondered, with us, with this precarious balance of trying to satisfy the human rights, and we do know, and everybody must by now accept the fact what you have just said, very, very serious situation with the escalation of violent crime. It's not getting any better at all. It's much worse. Nearly every other day now there's a gun crime. Sometimes 2 in a day, 3 in a day. And that's a very, very serious situation to be in. I just wondered, with us trying to satisfy human rights, and the premier and the cabinet went to the governor to ask for that they may grant or appoint one of the members, so to speak, as the sort of de facto minister of justice. I wonder, what do they do in Bermuda? They're similar to us in what we do, our economy and so forth, and the crown colony. But I do know they have a regiment there, and it is usually the soldiers who are deployed when you have a state of emergency, because it is they who have the powers then to do certain things and to keep law and order, or keep the people, controlled, and then the police force can go in and make the arrests and all that.
Yeah. I think in the case of Bermuda, they're more for natural disasters and things of that nature. I don't think that they have any armed capabilities for the Bermuda Regiment, even though I think they train in it, but in modern day, it's never been used. Yes.
They're trained in armed use of arms.
Yes, they are.
But I just wonder, what do they do? Do they have someone, a sort of a de facto minister of justice?
They had a
minister of
national security that is elected.
Yes.
He's elected, not like us.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So they would have more latitude, the government there to say, well, this is too serious now, we're going to do something about it, rather than like us having to go and ask the governor, because it seems like we have to get permission.
But we don't have to do that, because we have provision in our constitution that says we don't have to do that, but we refuse to do so. Because it seems to me that we don't want to take the responsibility to do that.
Caller, we're going to ask you to leave us there.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought so. And I remember that system, yes, what you're talking about on the other radio station, Mr. Dr. McFeel, about that Hilton. He was a West Indian cricketer.
That's right. Against Hilton, yes.
Yes.
And it was a question of the reasonable man. And the Privy Council at the time says that a reasonable Englishman, the reasonable man in England, would not take the words that say you are better than another man is better in bed than you as being words of provocation. And we say you tell a question on that man, you're looking to get killed. You're looking to get killed. Exactly what he did.
Thank you,
I was a little boy when it happened, but my brother, one of my brother-in-law, was a lifetime member of Kingston Cricket Club. When I grew up and was start to work, I remember he explained it all to me. I can't remember if he was hung. I don't think so. I think he served some time in prison.
Yes, he served a lifetime.
Okay, caller, we'll ask you to leave us there. We have one more caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, For the Record. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Mr. McFeel and
good morning.
Teresa.
Good morning.
We're talking about crime.
Yes.
Okay, so what about these people that come here that on permit and they don't have no work for these people? They have the selling numbers, they hang around these bars and stuff. You imagine how many people coming by boat and stuff like that?
Yeah, more than we know about.
Yes. And when we fight, right. When we try to protect our borders, then they won't go on the most way. It's really ridiculous, and it hurts me to know that my country gone from where it used to be to now. So it's so I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say. But we need to clamp down. We need to do our floors. We need to do time back. We need to run down and see these people and chase them down and find out if they have visa. If they have visa or they have permit. We need to check. We need to check on them. We need to check them out. We need to check them because there's some bad records. Some people in some certain areas. And unbelievable. Seeing so many people's criminals. So we have to be very careful nowadays. And that's why all this crime is going, because they get a permit and they're on the way to work. the selling numbers in causing all these crimes. So I just put in that piece this morning. Thank you. And have a
Thank you
good
very
day.
much, caller. Thank you. And what that points to is that you have the petty crimes or what they consider is victimless crimes to a certain
Yes.
extent, but those are the ones that lead to other things,
Yes.
as well. Now, one of before we go to the break, because we have to take a break. Now, one of our listeners says the position made by Billy and Dr. Macfield regarding the need for a definitive shifting of power away from non-elected to elected officials is a vital step in the evolution of our constitutional maturity. Independence is a different matter, but the control of powers of enforcement authorities, as in any true democracy, should not rest with anyone but our own elected representatives. So that's callers.
Thanks for the call.
view
Thanks,
on that.
thanks for that. Thanks for that corroboration of our position. That's always been my position.
Endorsing it, yes. Let's go to a commercial break. When we return, we will be on our last segment of For the Record this morning. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Mr. Teresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield, and I hope Billy is listening still because I'm going to put some questions to Dr. Macfield now in relation to this extradition request. First question will be, if the fight against extradition of this individual is successful, which means that the U.S. government fails in its request, fails to prove its case, what happens to that individual?
Then you will look at the country in which he's a
Where
citizen.
does he go? Where does he
Where
go?
the country that in which he claims citizenship or which he's a citizen of, the country which he's a citizen of, the government could deport him back to that country.
Okay.
Repatriate him back to that country which that he's entitled to live.
Okay.
And then the Americans could go to that country and file a new an extradition request for him there to that country. If he's a Jamaican national and he's entitled to live in Jamaica and has a Jamaican passport but not an American citizen, as Mr. Billis, as someone said, if he only has a green card, it means he's not an American.
What if he has dual citizenship?
Well, if he has dual citizenship if you notice under the extradition, you mean if he has dual citizenship?
Jamaican citizenship as well as U.S. citizenship. Yes.
Well, it would depend. The government would have to make a decision where to send him, and it would be where his domicile
Okay, let's put it this
and
way.
resident,
Let's
where
look
his domicile and resident at the time now that he is.
Okay, I'm going to put another scenario
Yes.
to you. It appears as if that person got an extension to stay. So when he
Yes.
was picked up by authorities, he wasn't here illegally.
Yes.
Right? So he was here illegally. If his fight against extradition is successful.
Yes.
He wasn't here illegally, so is it the right of the Cayman Islands government then to send him wherever? Can't he voluntarily then, because he's now free to go, can he now voluntarily go to any place that he wants to go that he's accepted to?
Well,
He may decide, let me go to Trinidad, let me go to the UK, or I'll go back home to Jamaica.
Well,
we couldn't direct him where he's going because we're not deporting him at this point in time. He hasn't committed an offense in the Cayman Islands. He hasn't overstayed in the Cayman Islands, and the courts have found that there are not sufficient grounds for him to be
yes, but
extradited.
there's a provision in immigration law that says if from any information received on that reliable information that you might be.
But that information wasn't reliable because the courts rejected it.
No. It not the fact that the courts rejected it. It doesn't say the court. It said the cabinet.
Okay.
Any information received by the cabinet, not the court. The cabinet doesn't have to wait till the court to reject the information. It says any information received by the cabinet that you might be undesirable and not be and your presence might not be an interest can make you a prohibited person.
But that would be another court fight again. I would
No,
imagine some
no.
lawyer will take that up and say, how can you declare my client a prohibited immigrant when my client has not committed any offense here in the Cayman Islands, and it has not been proven that I committed offense in the United States because the extradition hearing has found that out that I have not. There are not sufficient grounds for me to be extradited to the United States.
Not commit
because
an
of it.
offense. If you look at the immigration law, it's information.
Yes. I understand.
Information.
I understand.
Not commit offense. They don't have to go that far.
But they're going to argue it. Somebody's going to go to court and take it to court. Someone, if he has a good lawyer, he's not going to sit, and accept that.
Well, there are other ways to get rid of people too, other than extradition. Other than extradition too. I mean, they did. You saw what happened to Mr. Lee Rich.
Yes, yeah.
What they did with him. They simply allow him to get on the flight and go someplace else. To go someplace else.
And the U.S. authorities.
And the U.S. authorities
was
waiting there. So there's other ways to do things. And and here we are now. We have this person that's accused of this heinous crime in America, and we're going to pay for that because once the extradition request comes in, it's a treaty. It's international treaty that triggers that. And he has the right to defend himself from that. And if he doesn't have the money to do it, we have to put that up. We have to give him that.
Okay. And on the U.S. side, let's put this graphically for our listening and viewing audience. On the U.S. side, they would normally get some lawyer in the Cayman Islands to represent the U.S. interest, because can U.S. lawyers from the United States come?
No, they
can't come and practice lawyer. How is it done?
They can come and instruct the Crown.
Okay.
They can instruct the DPP who acts on behalf of the requesting state. It is the DPP who acts on behalf of the requesting state.
Okay.
But the requesting state can send a representative here to instruct them. The requesting state would send their lawyers here with all of the material which you have to lay before the court, and it is the requested state that has to put the requests before the courts. That is the reason, and why? Because the requesting state doesn't. Lawyers don't have the right to practice there.
And because of our legal system, the Cayman Islands is obligated to provide him with legal aid if he doesn't have the financial wherewithal to defend himself.
Exactly.
Okay, one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. We're going to make this our last call for the morning. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning again.
Hey, Billy.
No, Billy, yes.
Yes, I've been listening to the discussion on extradition, and of course, Dr. Maxfield has got far more experience in that area, and I have learned something in listening to him.
Okay.
So I have nothing to.
Many people do on this show.
Yes, I do. Now, regarding the legal aid aspect, that's very interesting because right now, as you know, there's this major matter where these ladies, Miss Alice Mako and her colleagues, have applied for legal aid to get help so that they can get beach access, which is part of, in my view, the heritage of the Cayman Islands.
That's right, Billy.
And they have been denied legal aid, but we are going to give legal aid to this person who is innocent until proven guilty, but looks very, very bad.
Yes,
I just thought that I should comment on that.
Thanks,
but
Billy.
Thanks very much. Quick comment on the issue of provocation. I heard you, Dr. Matthew, was on another talk show, and today talk about that British case. I thought I might relate to very briefly a case, an African case when I studied criminal law. A man finds his wife in the act of adultery with somebody. The man takes off. The husband runs after the man, catches up with him in 5 minutes, and kills him. And when it went to court, it was a colonial case. The British judge said, well, is this murder or manslaughter? Well, he said, well, it's murder. Because even if finding your wife in that act is provocation, 5 minutes was enough for that passion to cool.
Yeah.
It depends on how much passion you have.
Yes.
And in studying that case in later years, a lot of African scholars said that for somebody coming from that community, this was a very rural African community, a lot of scholars said that if it was an African judge, probably they would have said 5 minutes was not enough for the passion to cool for somebody in that community, and that perhaps if it was heard by a later African judge, maybe he might have said, most likely, that the 5 minutes was not enough for the patient to cool. So
Yes.
it was a very, very interesting case. So
Yes. Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much,
very
Billy.
Much, very much. Thanks
Yeah.
very much. Thanks for calling.
Billy was
But
pointing out.
Billy, before you go,
Okay.
Yes.
the problem. I spoke to one of the applicants for legal aid in the case where the beach access is, and they say that the court said that it wasn't a matter of public interest.
Yes, that's what-
Well, the right under the prescription law, the right to use the beach for picnic, fishing, swimming, all that, and things incidental to and the pathway to get there, it's a public interest.
I thought
I
so.
don't understand how the courts can say it's not a public interest.
I think
It's not an
that,
interest. It's not an interest between landowners. It's an interest to the whole public.
to the whole public, precisely, and so on. I mean, if this perhaps had been a dispute between two landowners
Yes.
about maybe the border thing and so on, it might not be of public interest.
Yes.
But this is a matter affecting about 200 beach access rights,
Yes.
over which about 500 affidavits were sworn and
Yes,
filed to
yes.
prove those 200 rights. How is that in a country like Cayman?
Not a public
Uh,
interest.
Exactly, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yes,
believe it's been
yeah.
appealed to a judge in chambers, and there'll be a ruling soon.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Billy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
Billy was talking about the hanging as being a deterrent, and I remember this old story being told about in the UK when they used to hang publicly hang pickpockets and murderers and
Yes,
stuff like
yes.
that. That while the hangings were taking place,
Yes.
you had pickpockets in the crowd
Yes,
working, working and picking
Working
pockets. So it
around
goes to
because-
show you
yes, go to
they
show-
are
yes.
witnessing
Yes.
it
Yes.
and still pickpocketing at the time. Well, Ms. T and Dr. Macfield, very good discussion this morning. We touched on so many different topics this morning as well. I think that in extradition discussion is very important. Now, some people may say, "Oh, you're putting ideas in people's head." These are not ideas that we just developed on our own. These are ideas that are out there, and any good lawyer,
Yes.
would be thinking about these,
Yes.
things as well. I know one of my friends keep teasing the other one because he's extremely irate about this Lord Graham is pretty
Lord Graham,
upset.
yes.
So Ha teases him and say, we understand that he's getting not only one QC from the UK, but two QCs.
Yes.
And then Graham's blood boils up and he gets all upset about the whole thing
Yes.
and everything else. So, Ha keeps putting his leg on it. But I want to thank you all for being here. And I'm going to give you we haven't had this in a long time to give you an opportunity to have some closing comments because we won't see each other again until next week, Wednesday, because Monday is a holiday.
Dr. Steve,
Doctor-
you want to do it?
No, I wrote some closing comments for you, but I don't have them now because when I looked, there was some typo,
Oh, okay.
and I would do that next week.
Okay.
and leave that to my friend here.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to say to those of you who intend to attend the Heroes Day ceremony on Monday, the 22nd of January, the program begins at 9 o'clock, but everyone is asked to be seated by 8:30 in the morning, and I believe that there will be a rehearsal tomorrow morning for it as well. But if you're going to attend, and I hope and I trust that as many people will attend as possible, please be there and be seated by 8:30 a.m. You want to get there early because there are only so many roads that lead to Hero Square and to town. So, traffic is going to be backed up and everything else. So you want to make your move early to get there as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who is less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station. Join Sterling, Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for a talk today. For the record, we'll be back on the air next week, Wednesday, because Monday is a holiday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the Heroes Day celebrations. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful, beloved Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.